Alright, so this video unfortunately got delayed massively due to the problems with the backpacks being disabled for so long, and a lot has happened since the initial balance changes. That being said, the Wither Goggles went through a ton of massive reworks, so I figured it'd be a good idea to cover all of the important details about them and how it compares to other armor pieces. However, before we do get to testing, I just want to point out that I do stream live over on Twitch every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so if you have any further questions about this video, feel free to stop by over there. But with all that being said, let's get straight into the video. Alrighty, so as you can see, today's video is going to be covering the Wither Goggles. Now, I will be comparing the Wither Goggles to the Storm Helmet, and I've got two of these helmets right here in my inventory, which I will get to later on in the video. But as a lot of you guys may already know, these goggles here have had a lot of recent reworks and a ton of changes made to them. And even though this video is very delayed, there's still a lot of stuff that I want to get covered in today's video that I don't think other people have really covered in their videos either. And overall, there's a lot of stuff that I want to get out of the way regarding both the Wither Goggles and the Storm Helmet. So the most obvious thing to get started here is going to be the just basic stat comparison. So if we go over and have a look at the Wither Goggles and also the Storm Helmet I have here, they have both been recombobulated. They are 5-starred. This one is G6P6 and this one is only G5P5, which is completely fine. When it comes to health and defense, it's not really too big of an issue. I don't have any ultimate enchants on the Storm's helmet either, but I've got Aqua Affinity and Respiration, while this one does have Wisdom 5, but it doesn't have Aqua Affinity or Respiration. Either way, that's not really the main point of this helmet. If you just have a look here, this is on the Necrotic Reforge, and I have got 450 intelligence when I do wear this helmet, while the Storm's helmet with the Necrotic Reforge gives us 600 intelligence, which is an extra 150 more that we do get with the Wither Goggles. However, looking back at the Wither Goggles here, we do have a very special stat on here, which it says ability damage plus 45%. But the main thing you want to look here is those gray numbers, as the plus 67.5% is the ability damage that you'll be gaining inside of dungeons. But if we flick back over to the Storm's helmet, you can see here that we don't get any extra ability damage. We do get more health and defense, and even without Growth 6 Prot 6, the health and defense is much higher on the Storm helmet than that of the Wither Goggles. Although I wouldn't say that's too much of a fair test because, like I said, my Wither Goggles aren't G6P6, so you can't exactly compare them as well. And the last thing about the Wither Goggles, as you can see, it doesn't have any set bonuses for this helmet. There's no full set bonus, there's no piece bonus, there's nothing special like that. While the Storm's helmet does have the Witherborn bonus, so if you weren't with the rest of the Storm set, you do get an extra Wither to help by your side, and there are some situations where it can be a little bit helpful. So the most obvious change is that the Wither Goggles actually used to have an ability bonus that you would get while wearing the helmet. Initially, you would get plus 70% ability damage to all undead mobs. While if you couldn't tell from the basic stat review, they changed that and made it an actual normal stat, and rather than it only affecting undead mobs, it now affects everything. However, there was a period of time where they kind of completely messed up the ability damage completely, and they did some changes and it wasn't working out, so it got to the point where the Storm helmet was actually doing way more damage than the Wither Goggles, which is why for a period of time the Storm helmet was the option to go for. And all the changes have been made to the Wither Goggles. The Storm's helmet is no longer the clear winner. And the final thing that I want to add here to the change that they made to the Wither Goggles, if you heard me speaking just before there, I did say that they gave plus 70% ability damage, but as you can see, it only gives plus 45% if we look at the stats here. Now, the most recent change that they made to this helmet, which I believe was less than a week ago when I posted this video, is that they made it so that when you star the helmet, that's when you actually get the increase in ability damage. And if you look at the gray numbers right there, we get plus 67.5%, which is really close to 70. Obviously, it's not bang on perfect, but it's still very comparable. But ultimately, all they did was they made the Wither Goggles a very good option, but only if you're able to max them out and 5-star them properly. Now, the next thing that I want to cover about both of these helmets is that their requirements are very, very different. The Storm's helmet has some very simple requirements where you only have to beat floor 7 once, and in order to even do floor 7, you have to be a minimum of Catacombs 24. The Wither Goggles, on the other hand, are unlocked at Ophelia when you do reach Catacombs 28. which makes them a much harder helmet to even be able to use, as you do need some higher catacombs requirements, which will take a little bit more effort to reach for most players. There's also a lot of other factors that come into play with both of these helmets, which I will talk about later on in the video. But before we get to all the costing, their EHP, how they perform in different dungeon runs, the best reforges, etc, etc, I'm going to hop into some damage tests both outside of dungeons and inside of dungeons, and I'll be using my Scylla, and also a spare Hyperion that I do just happen to have lying around. So making our way over to the crypts now, I'm going to be doing a very brief out of dungeons damage test, as you're really only going to be using these items inside of dungeons. But nonetheless, I have got my 2 weapons right here. I'll also go over all my stats and everything that I'll be using in today's video. So if you're curious to how I'm able to do all my damage, you'll be able to see how in a second. So as for the weapons I'll be using, I'm going to be using a Hyperion, which these are the enchants right here. 5-starred with it. It's got normal hot potato books. Those are the enchants. It's also recombobulated, and it has ultimate wise 5. I'll also be comparing with a Scylla, which does have the Art of War, Fuming Hot Potatoes, Withered Reforge, some better tier 7 enchants, and then ultimate wise 5. While the helmets are both on Necrotic, both of these helmets are 5-starred, while the chestplate and leggings are 4-starred, and my boots are 5-starred too. Now, I would show you guys all the accessories I'll be using, but to sum them up very quickly, I have got all of my normal talismans that aren't legendary or mythic on shaded. And then for my legendary and mythic talismans, they are all on strong. And because we're going to be doing a lot of magic damage here, I am both enchanting 60 and alchemy 50. But if you care about my combat and foraging skill, I am combat 50, foraging 31. And then my catacombs level is 32, with my mage level being 28. And lastly, I will not be using any pets in today's video, as I don't want to affect anything with the textbook item and the different magic scaling. I don't want to get too many factors into these damage tests, so I'm going to be keeping it simple with just the gear I have, and if you do decide to use pets, it might be different for you. So with that being said, I'm going to hop into the damage test on these crypticals right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, right click once, and try to get all the damage numbers that I can of a group of these mobs. And right off the bat here, you can probably tell that I get 2,625 mana using the Hyperion, but when I hold out my Scylla, I go down to 2,261. Either way, swapping back to the Hyperion here, using the Wither Goggles for the first test. If I go ahead, right-click once, and get some damage numbers, if I saw that correctly, we did about 548,000 damage on those mobs right there. And if I go ahead and use my Scylla now and do the same thing, we only did 412,000 damage, so it is about 70,000 damage less than when we use the Hyperion. And now swapping over to the Storm Helmet right here, if I go ahead and get some right-click damage on the Cryptical, we do about 414,000 damage with the Hyperion, which was around the same damage as the Wither Goggles and the Scylla. So if we swap over to the Scylla right now and right-click once, we do about 312,000 damage, which is significantly less than when we use the Wither Goggles. And now that we have those out of dungeon tests done, let's go hop into some dungeon runs really quickly here and get some numbers on the Crypt Likers as well. Alrighty, so inside of a dungeon run now, I am using the exact same gear that I was before, and I only have a Blessing of Power and a Blessing of Life. That shouldn't affect any of the mana that I get in this entire run, and only just a bit of the EHP. Now, I did have a viewer suggest to me in the comment section of my last dungeons damage testing video that I should be using these crypts here to test my damage with a different bunch of weapons. So I'm going to be taking that advice in today's video, and big thank you to whoever recommended me to do that. But with that being said, I do have the Wither Goggles put on right now. I will only be using the Hyperion for the damage test in the dungeons, as you probably don't really care too much about the Scylla anyways. And just a quick refresher on the enchants and stuff, that is what we'll be using. But with that said, if I go ahead and break this crypt right here, and then I go on F5, kill the Crypt Liker, we did do about 2,066,000 damage. So the Wither Goggles are currently at 2 million damage. And now moving on to the Storm's Helmet here, I also have a crypt right in front of me, which I'll be able to blow up with my Super Boom TNT using the exact same Hyperion. If I right click it, we did only 1.4 million damage. Now the other helmet that I didn't test outside of dungeons because it's just too useless to even talk about was the Bonzo's Mask. And now I know a lot of people do use the Bonzo's Mask, including myself. Now, I have this one right here, which isn't recombobulated and it's not really fully maxed, but it is still 5-starred and it's fragged. So I will be testing with the Bonzo's Mask as well, just to give you guys a damage comparison with this kind of setup that you would use in the boss room. Although take these numbers with a grain of salt, because if you guys are already aware, when you're in the boss room, you have a lot of blessings and you probably will be doing a lot more damage than I will. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead, open up this crypt right here. And if I right click the crypt lurker, we do 1.1 million damage on the crypt lurker, which is about 300,000 damage less than the Storm's helmet. And the Storm's helmet is about 600,000 damage less than the Wither Goggle. So as you guys saw from the damage tests on both the crypts and the dungeons, the Wither Goggles pretty much came on top every single time in comparison to the Storm's helmet and the Bonzo's mask. Now this pretty much is expected. The Wither Goggles does buff your ability damage, which is very, very powerful when you're using any right-click weapon. And because the Hyperion or the Scylla or whatever weapon you're going to be using is going to be a magic right-click weapon, you obviously want to get the maximum amount of ability damage possible, and that's what's going to make your weapon do a lot more damage. So the next big factor that I really want to talk about in this video is obviously going to be the cost. Now, to keep things simple, the Wither Goggles are actually a little bit more expensive than the Storm Helmet as I am recording this video. Although at any point in time, this could change completely as the Wither Goggles have a fixed price while the Storm's Helmet fluctuates all the time. The current price of Wither helmets as of me recording this video today are currently around 2.6 million coins, and if I have a look at the price of Laser's eyes as well, these are going for around 200,000 coins per eye, which if you round up all the costs to make a single clean Storm's helmet, it costs around 4.2 million coins. Now, if we go ahead and talk to Ophelia right here in the dungeon area, you can see that she actually sells the Wither Goggles for 4.85 million coins, although I do have Seal of the Family, so if I'm not mistaken, this should be 5 million coins for people who don't have Seal. So ultimately, the Wither Goggles not only have a higher Catacombs requirement, but they are more expensive than the Storm's helmet. And of course, they are more expensive than the Bonzo's mask as well. So ultimately, the Storm's helmet is definitely a much more affordable option, although you do miss out on about 600,000 damage, which to me is a very big trade-off, although there is a lot of benefits to the Storm's helmet, which I'm about to cover right now. Now, something very interesting that I did end up learning while the Wither Goggles were actually nerfed completely and you weren't getting any ability damage from them, and it's that when I was using the Storm's helmet, I actually didn't have to use my Bonzo's mask at all. And if you guys can recall from the previous runs we just did, the Bonzo's mask does 300,000 damage less than the Storm's helmet. Now, the reason why the Storm helmet doesn't really require for the need of a Bonzo's mask is because when you use the Storm's helmet paired with the rest of the Storm set, you actually get a lot more EHP than you do when using the Wither Goggles, because there's actually a sort of secret perk right at the bottom where it says that it reduces the damage you take from withers by 10%. And this applies to all of the piece bonuses here. I'm pretty sure they're individual to each piece, and that does obviously stack up over time. But even with that being said, you do still get a lot more health and defense, even if we don't talk about the fact that this is G6 P6 and this is G5 P5. And if you are someone who uses Wither Goggles, you might have to end up resorting to something like the Bonzo's mask, which gives you a second chance rather than the Storm's helmet not giving you a second chance, but just giving you more survivability in general. So ultimately, it really comes down to what you need, your personal preference, and a couple of other things that do come with all these helmets. Now, I am somebody who does play the Archer class. I'm not really a mage, and I was running a little bit of mage during the time that backpacks were disabled, although during that time I did find myself using the Bonzo's mask a little bit more than the Storm's helmet, simply because I was using Wither Goggles and I have the Catacombs requirement for it. Although looking back, when the Wither Goggles were completely nerfed and the Storm's helmet was actually useful, I feel like it might actually be a smarter play for me to use my own Storm's helmet, as that was doing more damage and it was also keeping me alive very well. So if you're a player like myself who doesn't really find themselves using the ability of the Bonzo mask much, you might want to be able to cop both the Storm's helmet and the Wither Goggles, because they both kind of have a pretty interesting use. Now, obviously, it's a given if you aren't even the correct Catacombs requirement to be using the Wither Goggles that you should be buying the Storm's helmet. And of course, the Wither Goggles is the superior helmet out of all of these. It does the most damage and it's also somewhat easy to get. But all in all, to summarize everything that I've said in this video in a couple of sentences, the Wither Goggles does the most damage, it isn't as great in the final boss room as the Storm's helmet or the Bonzo's mask, and ultimately mix and match all the helmets that you think you will need when playing dungeons and just go with what works best for you. And with all of that being said, that's going to wrap up everything that I had for today's video. So hopefully you guys did find this useful or informative in some way. And once again, my apologies for having this video so delayed and a lot of people already covering the topic. But with all that being said, that's going to be it from me today, guys. And as always, take care and peace. What?
You're weird, bro. Yo, it's me! It's me! Yo, look at that, bro. I'm in a dungeon run, guys. Gabriel dungeon confirmed. Gabriel, Modern Soldier is dungeon. Modern Soldier in a dungeon confirmed. Oh my god, dude. Sheesh! Yes, bro, yes, obviously.